After a devastating general election, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the Liberal Democrats were a spent force in British politics. But earlier this week, the party won a stunning by-election victory in Richmond Park, overturning Zac Goldsmith's 23,000 majority in the process. The new MP, Sarah Olney, has even gone as far as to suggest that the result paved the way for Parliament to override the EU referendum result. Here she is, talking to reporters after her victory.
Are you still going to vote against Article 50, and isn't that flying in the face of what the rest of the country voted for in that referendum?
So that's the commitment I made in my campaign, and my by-election victory means I've got my, a personal mandate from the voters of Richmond Park that that's what they want me to do.
A third of Tory leavers voted Liberal Democrat yesterday because they say, hang about, this is not what we voted for. Theresa May is taking a UKIP-ish slant on the 52%. They want a country that is open, tolerant and united. It's not 48 versus 52. It's about the country coming together behind a moderate, progressive opposition that the country desperately needs.
I'm joined now by the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg. He's now the party's Brexit spokesman. Welcome back to the programme.
Morning.
Now, Tim Farron says Richmond is a rejection of Brexit. He says that, and the 2015 general election, even Donald Trump, which will be news to America. In what way does 20,000 people voting for the LibDems in one of the most affluent anti-Brexit constituencies in the country mean any of that?
Look, I think when these by-elections happen, people, obviously quite rightly, both for and against, say all sorts of things which either turn out or not turn out to be true. I think clearly you can't extrapolate from one part of South West London to the rest of the country. No, I heard the result in South West Sheffield. South West Sheffield and South West London are very different. Having spent a lot of time in the Richmond campaign, I think the most significant thing of all was actually not about the arcane details of Article 50, single market and so on and so forth. It was just a very, very strong feeling amongst those kind of people, and there are millions of them around the country, who feel that because they disagreed with the outcome of the 23rd of June, they're somehow being delegitimised. They're no longer entitled to hold those views. They're being shouted down as moaners, as people are living in denial. And I think that's actually, and it's always emotion that drives these things more than cerebral ideas. It was that emotion that really came through in the by-election.
But next week we've got a by-election in a place that voted 62% to leave. I would suggest your party's not going to win that. A Brexiteer will win that, probably quite comfortably. So a big Remain constituency votes to remain, a big Leave votes to leave.
Exactly, UKIP might win. And if that were to happen, by the way, the interesting thing is, of course, it reveals that as politics becomes more and more defined by Brexit, it's the parties with the clearest positions, in this case UKIP and the Liberal Democrats, who tend to then be able to communicate more clearly with the public, whilst the two mainstream parties, Labour and the Conservatives, are increasingly divided and increasingly opaque in what they really mean. And so that, we'll see what happens.
Well, let's look at how clear-cut your party's position is, because Sarah Olney, your new MP for Richmond, she says she'll vote against triggering Article 50 come what may. Is that Lib Dem policy?
No, that is her personal mandate. Is the clip you just had, which you said she says that is the mandate she feels she has received, because that's the basis upon which she put herself forward to the people of Richmond in the by-election.
But you're not going to vote against Article 50?
Yes, there are circumstances in which I would, yeah.
But if you got a second referendum, you wouldn't?
If I got a second referendum and the government was quite clear it was going to seek to try and keep us in the single market, then we would vote for Article 50.
Well, let's look at some of that, because you've brought up this idea of a second referendum on the deal itself. Now, most EU leaders don't want us to leave. They're the ones we'll be negotiating with. If they know there's going to be a vote on the terms, surely they have a massive incentive to give us the worst possible deal.
I think the problem here is this all goes back to the origins of the debate prior to the 23rd of June. What's coming back to haunt everybody, the whole nation, was the fact that the Brexiteers didn't deign to spell out to people what they actually meant. Now, you will now no doubt quote this quote and that quote. Actually, there was no manifesto from Farage, Gove and Johnson, united, coherent, putting before the British people, not talking here about television clips in a television studio watched by a fraction of the electorate.
Well, there were some clear general principles.
No, that certainly was not.
Really?
On crucial things like whether we stay in the single market or not, absolutely not.
Well, the official Leave campaign Its framework document, widely covered by the media, said we want the supremacy of EU law and the European Court's jurisdiction to end. We want budget contributions to end. We want the EU's control over the UK's borders to end. And we want the UK to leave what they call the common commercial policy, which is another way of describing the single market.
No, it's not. No, common commercial policy is the customs union.
It covers both and the customs union.
No, it doesn't. I'm the only person in British politics who's actually...
Well, there were plenty of leaders of the Leave campaign said we want to leave the single market.
With respect, the common commercial policy you just read out is not the single
market. But it went
market.
on to talk about the single market too. They wanted to leave the customs union as well.
It's different to the single market.
That's quite clear, but they wanted to leave the single market too.
No, they didn't. I think we should be really clear. Why is it, in that case, why is it that ministers from this Brexit government aren't coming before Parliament now and say, absolutely, we stick to what we apparently said so clearly? They didn't. It was much more opaque than that. We will rule out the Norway option.
Let's look at what they said then. Let's just look at what both the leaders of your side of the campaign and the leaders of the Leave campaign said when asked about the single market. Let's see if we can see that now.
The British public would be voting, if we leave, would be to leave the EU and leave the single market.
Should we come out the single market?
I think that is almost certainly would be the case, yes.
Do you want us to stay inside the single market, yes or no?
No, we should be outside the single market.
I had Michael Gove in that chair and I said, after Brexit, will we be in the European single market, yes or no? And he said no.
And he was right.
So we won't be in the European single market.
Michael, yeah, absolutely.
We'd be out of the single market. That's the reality. Britain would be quitting the single market.
Where was the manifesto? Where was the document that...
It's clear enough, Nick Clegg, what they said.
Hang on, where was the manifesto from all of the key Brexiteers, Johnson, Gove and Farage, saying, British people, this is what will happen if you leave the European Union? It was not there, and I'll tell you why it was not there. It wasn't as if we were not warned. Dominic Cummings, apparently the intellectual architect of the Brexit campaign, said months before the campaign, he said, it's very important we don't say what we mean. And look, if
you're watching this programme will see very clearly what they said.
I'm terribly sorry to break you this, but what someone says to you, what someone sort of mumbles in admission, under cross-questioning from you in a television studio watched by a fraction of the electorate, is not the same as putting before the British people a clear plan. Where were the policy documents?
All right, well,
setting out what... No,
but let me ask
it's very
you
important
this.
because you've gone round the circles on this for weeks now.
Let me explain why. I'm just
why...
trying to get you to understand that leading people in the campaign made it clear we would leave the single market as members.
Why did David Davis then say, after the referendum, it's not even before the referendum, why did he say, in a post on Conservative Home, this famous essay he wrote before he even became Brexit Secretary, why did he say he thought single market arrangements should continue? Why did Greg Clark, a minister, when negotiating this deal with Nissan, say, and I quote, he said, we're pursuing not only trade arrangements with the rest of the European Union, free of tariffs, free of bureaucratic impediments. You know as well as I do, you cannot have trade free of bureaucratic impediments other than being a member of the single market.
If the second referendum's so important, why did you not mention it during the campaign?
Because we clearly were fighting to remain in the European Union.
Sure, but you never mentioned that if you lost, that there would have to be a referendum on the deal it said.
No, interestingly enough, the people who did mention the second referendum...
Let's just look what you said and see if this is a soundbite. Let's just run what you said.
It's quite different to any other kind of vote that we customarily cast in our lives. It's not like a general election, however important they seem, which sort of bind the hands of the next parliament for the next 5 years or set expectations about what a government will do. This is a once-in-a-generation vote.
Once in a generation. It's clear now that was if you won. If you lost, you wanted a second referendum.
Honestly, this sort of textual analysis is getting us nowhere. That is entirely consistent with saying that since the victorious side, the Brexiteers, did not deign to spell out to the British people what Brexit means. And we still don't know what Brexit means. We still have absolutely no notion whether they want to pay contributions or not, whether they want to be part of foreign policy arrangements or not, whether they want to be part of...
Why didn't you say that at the time?
Hang on a minute. That was on the 27th of April. That is one clip from a wider debate. What I'm saying to you is we are now, as the Liberal Democrats, quite logically saying, since the victors in that referendum, yes, they had a mandate to pull out of the European Union. They didn't have a mandate how to do it because they didn't deign to spell it out to the British people.
Well,
therefore, it's, by the way, it's not a second referendum. It is the first referendum, or it would be the first referendum on the terms of our departure and the terms of our new re-engagement with the rest of the European Union.
Position on soft Brexit. Your soft Brexit is we would remain a member of the single market, right?
Yeah.
Which means that we would Except free movement of people. That goes with membership.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that because, as you know,
broadly, yes.
Well, broadly, but it could be significantly different. My own view, for what it's worth, is that there is plenty of scope, if this government was intelligent about it, to say to other European Union member states, look, it is now time to grant to Britain, in return for Britain's continued membership of the single market, in other words, the least economically disruptive form of Brexit, to grant to Britain a kind of Europe-wide emergency break in immigration, because many other EU member states have voters who are extremely worried about, albeit...
But we don't know if we could get that.
Well, the government doesn't appear even to be trying.
And at the moment, membership of the single market means free movement. It also means being subject...
Norway, for instance...
Norway has free movement. Norway's even in Schengen.
But Norway actually has, as you know, they don't deploy it, but they have legal ability. They have a legal ability to constrain freedom of movement,
which they haven't
deployed. But that's their choice. And they have it as a legal entitlement.
And we would remain subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court.
Well, here's the problem with the whole single market issue. The single market, and I hear constantly, whether it's commentators or politicians, talk about the single market as if it's only to do with tariffs. The most important thing about the single market, as identified by Margaret Thatcher and Lord Cockfield at the time, is it's a body of rules.
Right. So, and they have to be justiciable, and that would be by the European Court.
Well, the EFTA Court, which is, if you really want to get into the...
Which follows ECJ case laws.
Actually, as the head of the EFTA Court has stated just this week, they have more discretion.
But they've never gone against ECJ. It would have to be the European Court.
They have chosen... Whether you have a direct ECJ ruling, or whether you have an EFTA ruling, or indeed another body, call it Mary Jane for all I care, the problem, I accept, is this. If you want to trade into a single market of rules, then one way or another, directly or indirectly, you are abiding by those rules. But by the way, if we were to trade significantly into the single market out of the European Union, we would be doing so anyway.
And you would stay in the customs union too?
Well, the customs union, I think, is a bit more complicated. I would.
But okay, well, let's just take that. You would do. Because I want to add up what all this means, Nick Clegg. Your idea of a soft Brexit is we remain single market membership, we continue with EU contributions, we have free movement of peoples, the jurisdiction of the European Court, we remain in a customs union, which means we can't do most of our own trade deals. You know what that's called? Membership of the EU.
No, it's not. As you know as well as I do, there are a number of countries in the EEA which are part of the single market, not part of the customs union, do make financial contributions, have, if with different qualifications, the ability for people to come in and out of the European Union. But of course I accept for the hardest hardline Brexiteers. But Andrew, this has always been the dilemma for us as a country, which is that what is economically sensible and what is right for the prosperity of future generations is not politically convenient to the Conservative Party, and what is politically convenient to them is economically self-harming. And what I choose, and what my party chooses, is the least economically self-harming future for our children and our grandchildren.
I'm really looking at what, given that you always say you accept the June 23rd result, when you add up everything you want to happen, it's clear you don't. You want an arrangement, a soft Brexit, which is very little different from the status quo, and you want a second referendum, which I come back to how I started, would incentivise the Europeans to give us such a bad deal that we'd vote against it, and you would encourage that.
First, to somehow claim that the status that Norway and other EEA countries have is equivalent to membership is a nonsense. They have a common agricultural policy, which is their own. They have a common fisheries policy.
You describe Norway as powerless and voiceless, a fax democracy, waiting by the
fax machine. But that is not my problem, Andrew. That is the problem of the Brexiteers who are promising, as you know, to have their cake and eat it. That is not my problem. They have won. I am now in opposition. We are, as you know, the Remainers, now the insurgents. They have won, and with victory should come clarity, responsibility, and a duty to the country, not to your own party. But hang on, it's very important.
Very briefly.
They are the ones who are hoisted by their own petard. They are claiming that we will have an economic utopia by pulling out of the world's largest single market, a single market we Brits created under Margaret Thatcher. But it's not my problem that they can't resolve their own dilemma that having access to that British manufactured single market does in one way or another mean you have to abide by the rules. That's not my problem, that's theirs. They need to sort it out. They are in charge.
Your party's called the Liberal Democrats. Many people watching this will think maybe it's time for a rebrand. Just drop the Democrat bit.
I don't know what you're driving at.
Well, because you seem to want to fly in the face of the democratic decisions of this country.
We are saying there are choices about how you leave the European Union, and we do believe that the softest possible departure, which, yes, of course, does mean that there are some compromises, but nonetheless safeguards the safety the clean environment and the jobs and the prosperity of our children and our grandchildren. And if it now comes to the point that anyone who dares suggest that maybe we should put our country before the narrow interests of Brexiteers is being shouted down as undemocratic, we've come to a very sorry pass.
Our viewers will make up their minds. Nick Clegg, thank you for being with us. Come back and see us as this unfolds.